After years of saving, sacrifices, and countless late-night discussions, Sarah and I finally achieved our dream. We had saved enough money to buy our first house. It felt surreal. We had been renting for so long, never quite feeling settled, always looking at properties online and imagining what our life would look like once we finally had a place to call our own. We imagined a home where we could truly begin the next chapter of our lives. The house we found in Naperville, Illinois, was perfect. It was a charming 3-bedroom craftsman, with a spacious backyard and just enough room to entertain, raise a family, or even create a personal sanctuary. It felt like the right fit for us, a fresh start. I could already picture Sarah working in her garden, a barbecue going in the backyard on weekends, and kids running around, well, someday, hopefully. It wasn't just about owning a house, it was about building a life together in a place we could finally call home. The closing day arrived, and we were filled with excitement and a little bit of disbelief. After so many years of hard work, we were finally here. We toasted to our new home with champagne, savoring the moment and feeling like we had accomplished something huge. There was so much promise in that moment, so much joy, and yet, I had no idea that the surprise waiting at the door would soon turn that joy into an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. When the doorbell rang, I was confused. We weren't expecting anyone, and I figured it was just a delivery person or maybe a neighbor stopping by to say hello. But when I opened the door, I saw Sarah's parents standing there, beaming with excitement, holding a cake that said "Welcome Home" and bright icing. Behind them, movers were unloading furniture into the house next door. "Surprise!" Diane exclaimed with a grin so wide it could have split her face. "We bought the house next door." At first, I thought it was some sort of prank. I mean, why on earth would Sarah's parents buy a house right next door to us? That's something you see in movies, not in real life. But the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't a joke. They had already moved in. Mark handed me a rolled-up blueprint, and I unfurled it with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. What I saw on the paper left me speechless. It wasn't just a blueprint of their new house, it was a detailed plan of their backyard and a gate, connecting directly to ours. They had installed it already. They had literally put a gate between our yards, with no prior discussion or consent. I stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to process what this meant for us. What did this mean for our privacy, for the quiet life we had imagined? At first, I tried to keep my cool, not wanting to make a scene on what was supposed to be a celebratory day. But the reality of it hit me fast. This wasn't just a friendly gesture. This was a complete invasion of our space. I turned to Sarah, looking for some sign that she was equally shocked, but she seemed just as surprised as I was. After all, she had no idea this was coming. Her parents had kept it a secret, and now, here we were, forced to deal with the consequences. "Mark, Diane, why didn't you talk to us about this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Oh, we thought it would be nice," Diane said with a big, cheerful smile. "It'll be convenient for when we're grandparents. You won't have to go all the way around to visit us, we can just pop in through the gate." She seemed so pleased with herself, as if this was some kind of perfectly reasonable solution to living next door to your daughter. I tried to be understanding, I really did. I could see where they were coming from, they wanted to be close for the future grandkids, after all. But what they didn't understand was that Sarah and I weren't even there yet. We were still in the early stages of trying to start our family, and the idea of them being just next door, with a literal door to our backyard, was unsettling. It was too soon. We needed space to figure things out on our own, but now, it felt like we were trapped, like we had no say in our own home. At first, I kept telling myself that it was just a small issue. It wasn't ideal, but we could make it work. I convinced myself that maybe this would be fine, family close by, ready to help. It would be convenient. After all, they were good people, and they were excited to be near us. But over time, it became clear that things weren't as simple as I had hoped. Diane began showing up unannounced, offering unsolicited advice on everything from our lawn care to the color of the house trim. It was clear she wanted to have a hand in everything, and every time we set a boundary, she brushed it off with a smile and a laugh, saying, "We're family. There's no need for boundaries." Soon, Mark started using our shed without asking. It was as if they felt entitled to everything in our yard, as though our property was their property. It wasn't just that they were there all the time, though. It was the way they completely ignored any attempt to set clear limits. They'd host loud parties that spilled over into our yard, sometimes well into the night, and when we asked them to keep it down, we were met with laughter and the same response: "We're family, remember?" I was at my breaking point. I installed a lock on the gate, hoping that would give us the space we desperately needed. But the next morning, the lock was gone. Diane had removed it. I built a fence instead, thinking it would finally give us some privacy, but once again, they called the HOA, claiming that the fence violated the community guidelines. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. So, I started documenting everything. Every instance, every violation. I took photos, videos, and timestamps, just in case we needed evidence down the line. I even consulted a real estate attorney, who confirmed that their modifications were illegal. The gate they had installed without permission? Illegal. The way they had crossed the boundary into our backyard? Also illegal. I filed complaints with the city and the HOA, hoping that this would put an end to their overstepping. But instead of backing down, Mark and Diane doubled down. They continued to use our shed, continued to host loud parties, and continued to ignore our boundaries. I started to get creative, doing things to make their lives as uncomfortable as they had made ours. I installed motion-activated sprinklers that sprayed water whenever they walked through the gate. I planted thorny bushes along the fence line to make it harder for them to cross into our yard. I even threw my own loud parties, complete with friends who had motorcycles and sound systems, just to show them what it felt like to have their space invaded. Surprisingly, the city finally fined them for unauthorized construction, and the HOA issued warnings. Their property value dropped, and within 6 months, they listed the house for sale. We celebrated with a backyard barbecue, free from uninvited guests, and it felt like we had finally won. We thought we were finally winning. After years of being trapped in a nightmare, Sarah and I were breathing a sigh of relief. The house next door was on the market, and our lives were finally returning to normal. For the first time in months, we were able to enjoy our backyard without fear of intrusions. We no longer had to worry about unannounced visits from Diane or the loud, disruptive parties Mark hosted. Our privacy, which we had longed for, seemed to be returning. But, as with everything with Mark and Diane, we couldn't have been more wrong about this victory. About a week after they listed their house, the strange things started happening again. At first, it was small things. One morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper from the front porch and saw that our trash bins were tipped over, with garbage scattered across our lawn. At first, I thought it was just an animal looking for food, but when I looked closer, I realized that the trash had been carefully and deliberately spread out. My gut twisted. This wasn't some random animal, it was someone with a specific intention. I turned to our security camera footage to see if it captured anything suspicious. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was 3:17 a.m. Mark, in his bathrobe, walking slowly out of his house, looking around like he was checking to make sure no one was watching. Then, without a care in the world, he casually flipped our trash bins over, scattering garbage all over the lawn. He walked back toward his house, still acting like it was no big deal, as if it were a normal, everyday occurrence. I was furious. This wasn't a harmless prank. It wasn't just petty behavior. It was an act of retaliation, and it made me feel powerless in my own home. I immediately sent the footage to the HOA, hoping they would take action. Their response? "We'll look into it." And as usual, nothing happened. That was just the beginning. A few days later, we noticed another disturbing shift. Diane, ever the manipulator, began spreading rumors around the neighborhood. She told everyone who would listen that Sarah and I were aggressive, that we yelled at her through the fence, and that we were trying to ruin the community's peaceful, family-friendly atmosphere. It was typical of Diane, she was using the very thing we had fought for against us. She was trying to paint us as the villains in a story she had completely fabricated. We found out from a sweet elderly couple across the street who came over with cookies and an awkward look on their faces. They had heard Diane's version of events and were clearly uncomfortable. I could tell they didn't know what to believe, but the whole situation felt incredibly isolating. Soon, we noticed even more strange occurrences. Every time we left the house for more than an hour, someone had been snooping around our yard. I installed new cameras, this time hidden ones, to catch whoever was responsible. The footage confirmed what I had feared. Mark had a key to our shed. Not just the gate, he had a key to our shed, and it seemed like he had been using it to mess with our stuff. Tools were moved around. Lights would be unplugged. Small things that seemed so insignificant on their own, but they added up. It was like they were trying to make us feel uncomfortable, to invade our privacy little by little until we finally snapped. I decided enough was enough. I changed the locks on the shed twice, then bolted the inside shut. But when I confronted Mark in front of our neighbors, he just smirked and denied everything. He had no shame. "You might want to watch your attitude," he said, laughing. "This neighborhood watches everything." It was more than just a threat, it was an outright warning. Mark was telling me that he had eyes on us at all times, that he had some kind of control over our lives, whether we liked it or not. The intimidation was starting to get under my skin. It was clear that this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about control over Sarah, control over me, and control over every aspect of our lives. Not long after that, we started noticing something even more unsettling: a silver sedan parked across from our house at random times. It wasn't a neighbor's car, and whenever I looked at it, the same guy was sitting inside, just staring at our house. I took photos of the car and the man inside, but when I showed them to Sarah, she panicked. She didn't want to call the police because she feared it would make us look paranoid. I knew, though, that this was more than just a few annoying neighbors. Mark and Diane were no longer just being obnoxious, they were becoming obsessed with control. Then came the final blow: Mark and Diane took the house off the market. I was stunned. When I casually asked Diane about it at a neighborhood barbecue, trying to play it cool, she leaned in and whispered in a way that made my stomach churn. "We're staying," she said, her voice low. "We realized it's better to be close for the grandkids." The problem was, Sarah and I didn't even have kids. We were trying privately, but only close family knew that. How did Mark and Diane know? How did they know our most private struggle? I felt violated. They were using our personal life to manipulate us. It was like they had no boundaries, no respect for our space, and no regard for our feelings. That night, Sarah broke down in tears. She felt completely trapped. She hated that they were always around, always watching, and always pushing their way into our lives. She hated being in our own backyard, a place we had fought so hard to call our own. The house we had worked 10 years to afford had become a prison. We argued that night hard. Sarah blamed me for not stopping them sooner. I blamed her for not supporting me when I wanted to take legal action. We both felt helpless, stuck in a situation we had never imagined. That night, Sarah stayed at her sister's, and that's when I decided I wasn't going to take it anymore. The turning point had come. I was done. I couldn't just sit back and let Mark and Diane control our lives any longer. I needed to take back our space, our home, and our peace of mind. No more pretending like this was just a minor issue that could be ignored. They had crossed every line imaginable, and now, it was time to make them face the consequences. I spent the next 2 full weekends going through city records, zoning laws, HOA covenants, and noise complaints, anything I could find that would help me build a case against them. I spoke to real estate agents to confirm what I suspected, that Mark and Diane had broken multiple laws when they installed that gate and made alterations to their property without the proper permissions. I wasn't just dealing with rude neighbors anymore. This had become a legal battle. I decided to take it to the city council. I knew the HOA wasn't going to be much help, but I had the evidence. I laid everything out: the unauthorized gate, the ongoing harassment, the constant surveillance. But what really hit hard was the video I had of Mark installing the gate before they even closed on the house. That was proof that he had trespassed on a property that wasn't legally his. I wasn't just fighting for privacy anymore, I was fighting for the respect we deserved in our own home. The next day, I reached out to a local journalist who ran a small neighborhood watchdog blog. I figured if I could get the story out there, it would force the city to take action. I handed him everything: photos, video clips, written statements, and within hours, the blog post was live. Suburban nightmare, in-laws from hell buy house next door, install secret gate. It wasn't long before the local news picked it up, and suddenly Mark and Diane were the talk of the town. No one was smiling at them anymore. The neighborhood started to view them differently. The HOA board meetings became tense. People were angry, not just at Mark and Diane's behavior, but at how they had completely disregarded the community and their neighbors. Someone even egged their car one night, something that made me smile just a little bit, even though I knew it wasn't exactly the most mature reaction. Diane, predictably, broke down in front of her house, yelling at Sarah. "How could you do this to us?" she screamed. But all I could think was, how could they do this to us? For a couple of weeks after the blog post went viral, things seemed quiet. Too quiet. Mark and Diane stopped with the trash games, the passive-aggressive comments, and the constant attempts to invade our space. They kept their heads down, and for the first time in months, Sarah and I were able to relax. I began to think that maybe, just maybe, we had won. Maybe they had learned their lesson. But then, the certified letter came. It was from a lawyer. Mark and Diane were suing us for defamation. They claimed that we had intentionally destroyed their reputation and caused them emotional distress. They even said that we cost them tens of thousands of dollars and lost home value from the failed sale of their house. The worst part? They pinned the blog post and the local news segment squarely on us. Sarah lost it when she saw the letter. "How can they do this?" she asked, her voice trembling with frustration. "We're their family." I couldn't believe it either. I didn't even know you could sue your own daughter and son-in-law for telling the truth. We were honestly just trying to defend ourselves and protect our home. But they were going to drag us through the mud because of their own guilt. We lawyered up fast. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, our lawyer subpoenaed their emails and texts, and that's when everything came crashing down. We uncovered messages between Diane and a real estate agent named MJ, messages that were chilling to read. Turns out, Mark and Diane had planned this whole thing from the very beginning. "Diane, they'll never see this coming. Once we're next door, we'll raise the grandkids, right? MJ, you sure the gate won't be a problem? Diane, I have the contractor booked before closing. It'll be in before they even move in. They won't have a say. MJ, and once they're frustrated enough, they'll move. We'll offer to buy their place at a friendly discount. Everyone wins." Reading these messages was a punch to the gut. They had been planning to take our house the whole time. Their goal wasn't just to live next door, they wanted to force us out, and when we were gone, they were going to buy our home at a fraction of the value. They were trying to manipulate us into giving up our space so they could control everything. They had orchestrated this entire thing from the start, and they had used our personal lives, our struggles with starting a family, against us. When Sarah saw those messages, something inside her snapped. She went completely silent, cold and focused. I could see the change in her, a quiet determination that I had never seen before. She grabbed her phone and started texting her sister, her brother, her cousins. Within the hour, we had a small army ready to back us up. Everyone in Sarah's family had a story about Mark and Diane's manipulative behavior, about the power plays they had pulled over the years, but none of them had ever been this bold. Sarah decided it was time to go public. She sat down with the same journalist who had written the original blog post and gave him everything: the emails, the gate photos, the security footage, the lawsuit documents. A new article dropped: "In-laws from hell, the plot to steal their own daughter's home." The local ABC affiliate picked it up, followed by a national news outlet. The story blew up even bigger than before. Mark and Diane became infamous. Their faces were all over Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, and other platforms. Someone even made a dramatic reenactment of the whole situation on YouTube, and it quickly garnered millions of views. The internet had dubbed Diane the Gate Mother, and she was now a meme, something she could never escape. Mark and Diane dropped their lawsuit the very next day, but the damage had already been done. They couldn't hide anymore. But the saga didn't end there. The HOA called an emergency meeting. The neighbors were outraged. They demanded the gate be removed immediately. One board member said, "It's not even about property lines anymore. It's about trust." The board voted 9-0 to order the gate's removal. Mark tried to object, yelling about family rights and legacy planning, but no one cared. The contractors arrived the next morning, and by lunchtime, the gate was gone. It was a small victory, but it felt so good to finally see that gate removed from our lives. That wasn't the end of it, though. The next day, someone tagged their fence with spray paint that read, "Family doesn't stalk family." I don't know who did it, but I didn't lose any sleep over it. I was just happy the gate was finally gone. But just when we thought we were in the clear, we got another knock on the door. This time, it was a city inspector. Mark and Diane had filed a complaint against us, claiming that we had an illegal shed extension on our property. Of course, we didn't have one. But Mark had doctored photos and even tried to claim that we were using unpermitted electrical wiring. This time, we were ready. I handed the inspector a flash drive with the real blueprints, city permits, and a 2-minute security video showing Mark standing on our lawn, taking measurements in the middle of the night. The inspector left, and we never heard from him again. He filed a report, not against us, but against Mark for trespassing again. And this time, the police got involved. 2 days later, the police came by. They weren't just there to ask questions, they had a warrant. Turns out, that doctored photo Mark had used in his complaint was more than just an annoying tactic. It was fraud. He had submitted it as evidence to a city agency, which made it a crime. The police arrested him on the spot for filing a false report and trespassing. Diane came running out of the house, waving her phone like she was recording a documentary. "This is harassment. We're the victims," she screamed. But no one was listening anymore. The neighbors gathered on their porches and lawns, watching in silence. I'll never forget the moment when Mark was put into the back of the squad car. Sarah didn't say a word. She just stared, almost as if she was seeing him for the first time. Mark was charged with a minor offense, but it was still on record. Diane spiraled. She went on social media rants, blaming fake news and calling the entire neighborhood toxic. She posted pictures of us with captions like, "Would you trust these people with your children?" But her last bridge with the family was burned when she showed up at a city council meeting and screamed at the mayor about backyard tyranny. That clip went viral again. Within a month, Mark and Diane were moving. They offered us the chance to buy their house before listing it, but Sarah just laughed. A cold, bitter laugh that I had never heard from her before. She then told me her plan. We didn't buy their house. Instead, we helped a friend of mine from college, who was a real estate developer, turn it into a short-term rental for visiting medical workers and traveling nurses. The HOA, still furious with Mark and Diane, approved everything. The house hit the market, but no one wanted it. They ended up selling it for $90,000 below what they paid, and her friend painted the entire exterior a loud, modern teal, clashing with every other neutral house in the neighborhood. Mark and Diane moved to a rundown duplex in a neighborhood with no HOA and no family nearby. Do I regret anything? Yes. I regret not putting up a fence the second they bought that house. I regret laughing when they showed up with that blueprint. But I don't regret standing up for myself. Sometimes, you have to be the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in your own. Sarah and I still live in that house. We've rebuilt. We planted trees. We got a dog. That gate's gone, but in the spot where it used to stand, we put a little garden statue, a gnome with a sign that says, "No trespassing." Not even you, Grandma.